Sometime in the fading hush of a Pennsylvania evening, a man stood in the skeletal remains of everything he once believed would save him. Daniel Merrick, 61, alone, exhausted, felt the cold wind slip through the blackened ribs of the house he had spent 5 years restoring with his own bruised hands. Smoke lingered in the air like a bitter memory, curling through the collapsed beams and ash-soaked earth as he stood beside his daughter, Claire, who hadn't set foot here in 3 long years. They were surrounded by the quiet crackle of ruins, both unsure how to speak the things they'd left unsaid for so long. When Claire brushed aside a charred plank and revealed the corner of a metal box hidden deep inside the destroyed south wall, Daniel felt something shift, not in the rubble beneath their feet, but in the story of his family. The fire had taken everything except the one thing that had somehow survived, a fireproof box sealed decades before he was born. Inside it, they found blueprints older than memory, letters written in elegant, fading ink, and ledgers filled with names of people who once took shelter behind these walls. It was as if the house itself had fought to keep a secret alive, one buried long before Daniel ever swung his first hammer. And now the ruins whispered a truth waiting to be uncovered. As Daniel turned the yellowed architectural drawings under the weak winter sun, he felt the weight of history settle onto his shoulders like dust. The house he thought he'd known, the one he'd spent years sanding, patching, painting, had once been something entirely different. The blueprints showed rooms that weren't on any record, concealed stairways, hidden chambers beneath the foundation. Unmarked spaces in the basement that he had walked across hundreds of times without ever suspecting what lay just beyond the plaster and brick. Claire knelt beside him, reading the delicate cursive on the first bundle of letters. Each line carried the urgency of a different era, families arriving under cover of darkness, arrangements made discreetly between strangers, movements timed to keep desperate people unseen. The house had been more than a home. It had been a refuge. A safe station for families fleeing hunger, persecution, and a world collapsing around them during the Great Depression. Daniel's great-grandfather, Benedict, had run it without recognition, without thanks, and without ever telling the generations that followed. Standing there in the ruins, Daniel understood the truth with startling clarity. He hadn't been restoring a house. He had been restoring a monument to courage, a silent sanctuary built by hands that once defied fear. Over the next morning, in the cramped room Daniel rented above a hardware store, father and daughter laid the contents of the box across the floor like fragments of a long-forgotten map. The ledger was the heart of it. Names, hundreds of them stitched across 12 years. Beside each one, short notes written in steady handwriting, arrived from Chicago, 6 persons, infant ill, stayed 3 months, came from New York, seeking safe transit, moved on to Harrisburg after work was arranged. And threaded between the entries were flourishes of something deeper, compassion, resolve, and the quiet bravery of a man who had opened his home when the world had slammed its doors. But the letters revealed a second voice woven through the work, a woman named Ainlise Keller. Her handwriting danced between the margins, offering updates, warnings, and gratitude that seemed to glow through the years. The more they read, the clearer it became that she wasn't merely an assistant or correspondent. She was a partner. And something more, someone who believed in Benedict's mission with fierce devotion, despite the rising hostility of those who wished the refuge network buried. As dusk deepened around them, Claire looked at her father with a determination Daniel had not seen since she was a girl. "We have to follow this," she said. "We owe them that much." And Daniel, with the house's ashes still clinging to his boots, nodded. The past began unraveling with startling speed. At the Chester County Historical Society, an archivist named Constance ushered them into a quiet room filled with dust-softened boxes and memories that smelled of old paper and forgotten truths. She recognized the name Ainlise Keller instantly, not because of fame, but because of whispers passed from generation to generation, rumors of a woman who defied her wealthy family to fight for those without shelter. As Daniel and Claire sifted through photographs and brittle newspaper clippings, the outlines of a life filled with purpose took shape. Ainlise attending clandestine meetings, organizing relocation funds, connecting families to safe havens across states. But Constance's face tightened when they asked about Ainlise's death. "Accidental drowning," she recited. "At least that's the official story." Yet her tone betrayed doubt. One all. Old clipping mentioned the death only in passing, as if the county had been eager to move on. But tucked inside the archive was something far more chilling, a witness statement from a groundskeeper, rewritten, altered, edited. Constance slid a slip of paper toward them. "If you want the truth," she whispered, "you must speak with the groundskeeper's son." And suddenly, the mystery of the fireproof box expanded into something darker, deeper, and more dangerous than either Daniel or Claire had imagined. At a small landscaping office off a rural highway, Perry Sutherland's son, now an old man himself, opened a manila envelope his father had kept hidden for decades. The air grew still as he handed Daniel a letter sealed with time but trembling with urgency. It was from Ainlise herself. In graceful handwriting that carried the quiet strength of a woman unafraid to face danger, she wrote of threats made by a powerful industrialist named Jacob Brenner, a man whose influence stretched through the county like an unseen shadow. She documented his warnings: cease helping refugees or face consequences. She described a final meeting she agreed to alone, against her better judgment, to protect Benedict and the families under their care. "If I do not return," she wrote, "let it be known it was no accident." Daniel felt the words burn in his chest. For the first time, someone had spoken clearly from the past. Ainlise had predicted her own death. The pieces began falling into place with unsettling cohesion: her sudden drowning, the rewritten statement, the wealthy man with political motives. The groundskeeper's son spoke softly. "My father always said they lied about how she died." The old landscape office felt suddenly too small to contain the truth that unfurled inside it. More revelations followed, some through genealogy contacts, some through old diaries provided by distant relatives, and some through Brenner's own archived papers. A woman in Maryland confirmed her grandmother had been sheltered by Benedict and Ainlise before fleeing Nazi persecution. A diary discovered in a farmhouse revealed tender letters exchanged between Ainlise and Benedict, letters that spoke of a devotion stronger than fear. And inside the Historical Society's storage room, Daniel and Claire unearthed photographs Brenner himself had taken. Families entering the Merrick home at night, children clutching toys, adults wrapped in heavy coats against the cold. On the back of one photograph were the words, "Subject continues activities despite warnings. Direct action required." It was the closest thing to a threat written in ink. And deeper in the boxes, they found something worse: a confession letter from a man hired by Brenner dated days after Ainlise's death. The man spoke of guilt, of being paid, of fleeing town. His name was omitted as if guilt itself had erased him. But the meaning was undeniable. Ainlise had been murdered, and Brenner, the county's celebrated patriarch, had orchestrated it. With overwhelming evidence in hand, Daniel and Claire stepped into a battle against a legacy protected by money and power for generations. The Brenner Foundation's lawyers sent warnings. Officials questioned their motives. But the truth was heavier than fear, and they carried it into boardrooms, historical committees, and public hearings. One final discovery sealed the story beyond dispute. A letter written decades later by Brenner's own granddaughter, confessing her grandfather's guilt and documenting how she had burned his private journal under pressure. "I could not burn my conscience," she wrote. "One day someone must know." When Daniel read those words aloud during a public presentation, silence spread through the room like a held breath. For the first time, the community saw the truth not as rumor, not as speculation, but as history heavy with blood and courage. Soon, news outlets carried the story. Descendants came forward. Restorations began. The Merrick estate, once reduced to ashes, became the site of a memorial funded by people whose lives existed only because Benedict and Ainlise had risked everything. And through it all, Daniel and Claire worked side by side, their fractured bond slowly knitting itself together through shared purpose and the ghosts of heroes who had brought them back to each other. Sometime months later, on the quiet land where the Merrick house once stood, Daniel and Claire stood beneath a sky brushed gold by evening. A granite marker rose from the earth, carved with the names of the families saved and the two people who made their survival possible. Children played along the path nearby. Descendants placed flowers in silence. And as the wind rustled through the memorial garden, Daniel felt, for the first time in years, whole. He placed a hand over the stone, whispering a quiet thank you to the man and woman whose courage had shaped generations. Claire stood beside him, smiling softly. "You rebuilt more than a house," she said. "You rebuild us." Daniel breathed in the warm air, feeling the truth settle into him like light. The fire had not destroyed his purpose. It had uncovered it. As the story now reaches new listeners, he hopes it lights something inside them too. A reminder that ordinary people can shape history, and that buried truth can rise from the ashes stronger than flame. If this story moved you, consider subscribing, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and helping this channel grow so more untold histories can find their voice. And now I want to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it as you hear this story?